Hey, I'm Rob for JestaThaRogue and I'm going to show you how to play Marvel Champions, the card game. This is a game for 1 to 4 players, plays in about 90 minutes, is designed by Michael Boggs, Nate French and Caleb Grace and is published by Fantasy Flight Games. Players cooperatively play as heroes trying to defeat a villain while thwarting their evil scheme. Defeat the villain before all the heroes are defeated, or they complete their scheme to win the game. For setup, we're going to start with a player and you pick a blue back hero deck. Now in your first games it's suggested you play with Spider-Man and or Captain Marvel, who have pre-built decks in the box. Each hero from the base game also has a starter deck listed on page 20 and 21 of the rulebook, with deck customization rules on page 22. Each deck comes with a double-sided identity card. This is placed alter ego side up. This is shown in the middle of the card to the right and will have the hero on the other side. Set a hit point dial to the hero's starting health as shown on the bottom of the identity card, which for Peter Parker is 10. Each player also has a number of orange backed cards. One is labelled Obligation at the top and the rest are labelled as that hero's nemesis at the bottom. These are set aside for now. The rest of the player deck is shuffled together and contains 3 types of cards. Hero cards of that hero's colour with the name and logo of the hero in the bottom right. Aspect cards coloured in one of the 4 available aspects, which in Spider-Man's starter deck is yellow Justice cards and a few basic grey cards. And now each player will shuffle their deck and you give a random start player the start player token. Put the status cards and tokens in piles of their type. Now select an orange backed villain deck. It's suggested you play against Rhino in your first game. Just like the heroes, each villain has a scenario deck list on page 23, which also includes additional customization rules. Take the purple backed villain cards and the double-sided main scheme card. The rest of the villain deck is shuffled together and contains 4 types of cards. Villain cards are that villain's colour with the name on the bottom left. Standard encounter cards marked standard in the bottom left. An encounter set, which in the starting setup for Rhino is Bomb Scare, again shown in the bottom left. And finally each obligation card set aside earlier for each hero in the game. Follow the setup instructions on the A side of the main scheme. This involves stacking up the villain cards in order with 1 on top and 2 on the bottom. Rhino 3 can be returned to the box in your first game, but as the scheme suggests, you can use Rhino 2 and 3 to make Rhino a little tougher in future games. Now you just follow the rest of the setup instructions on the main scheme, which will already be complete if you're playing with the suggested starter deck. All you need to do is switch side A to side B on the main scheme. Other villains like Ultron may have additional setup steps, so be sure to read the cards. Take the villain dial and set the life total to match the hit points value on the bottom left of the Rhino card per player. So as Rhino 1 is 14 hit points, in a 2-player game this would be 28. The head silhouette before a value always makes that value per player. Players draw cards from their deck equal to their hand size, shown on the bottom left of their identity card. For Peter Parker this is 6. Players can now mulligan once by discarding as many cards as they like from their hand to their discard pile and drawing back up to their hand size. Do not reshuffle your deck just yet. At this point, complete any setup instructions on the player's identity card. For example, T'Challa will search their deck for a Black Panther upgrade and add it to their hand. Now onto gameplay, which is done over 2 phases, the player phase and the villain phase. In the player phase, players are going to take a turn in turn order, taking any number of the 5 actions available. The actions a player can take are on the blue side of the player reference card. First, the player can change form once per turn by flipping from alter ego to hero or the other way. This is the only action limited to once per turn, and the card will remain in the same state, either ready, which is upright, or exhausted, horizontal, and any tokens or status cards on the character will remain. And the second action is to play a card from your hand, put the card into play, and pay the resource cost in the top left. Discard cards from your hand to pay the total cost. The resource value and type of those cards is shown in the bottom left. For example, Daredevil will give you 1 physical resource, Genius will give you 2 mental. You could discard both these cards and use the 3 resources to pay for Jessica Jones. There are 4 types of card: Event, Ally, Support and Upgrade, and some of those cards will have bold keywords in those rules text, and we'll look at some of those as we go through. If the bold text specifies hero, it can only be played or activated if the player is in hero form. The same applies to alter ego. There are also some trait keywords in the middle of the card that may be referenced by other cards in the game. For example, I mentioned T'Challa will search for a Black Panther upgrade during setup. The Black Panther trait can be found in the middle of the card. On to the different card types, and event cards are paid for, resolved and discarded. For example, Haymaker lets you deal 3 damage to an enemy. Cards labelled Interrupt can be played for on any turn in response to an event happening, even on the villain turn, but they must be paid for in the same way. For example, Backflip will prevent damage that Spider-Man was about to take. Ally cards are put into play ready. You have a limit of 3 allies in your play area, but you can simply discard an ally already in play to make room. Cards labelled Response have an ability that triggers when a condition is met. For example, Mockingbird triggers when she enters play, stunning an enemy. This is optional. Forced responses are not optional. When the condition is met, the effect must be resolved. The same applies for any forced keyword, including forced interrupt. Support cards are paid for, then put into play ready, and will stay there until the card instructs you to discard it. Support cards like Aunt May are exhausted as an action. In this case, heal Peter Parker for 4 damage. Just a note, you can't go above your maximum health. Support cards like the Triskelion stay in play and have an effect. This one increases your ally limit by 1. Upgrade cards, once paid for, either stay near your identity card or are attached to another card. The card will tell you what to do. For example, Tenacity will stay in your play area until activated, but Spider Tracer will come into play attached to a minion. The third action is to trigger and request actions of cards already in play. Pay the cost before the arrow to take the action after the arrow. For example, exhaust Avengers Mansion and choose a player. They draw a card. Tenacity asks that you spend a physical resource, which you can gain here from discarding Webbed Up, and also discard another card from your hand to ready the hero. Now these actions can be played as many times as you like, as long as you can pay the cost. You can also ask another player to trigger one of their actions or play an event card from their hand on your turn. So for the example earlier, I could ask you to trigger your Avengers Mansion on my turn so I could draw a card that I need. The villain may have cards you can activate as an action. For example, Enhanced Ivory Horn allows you to spend 3 physical resources while in hero form to discard the card. The fourth action is to recover, attack or thwart with your hero, alter ego or ally. You must exhaust the card in order to use its ability, so it must be ready for you to take these actions. Your alter ego can recover, gain the amount of health shown, which in Peter Parker's case is 3. Remember, you can't go above your maximum health. Thwart to remove that much threat from a scheme. For example, Spider-Man can remove 1 threat from a scheme. Attack to deal damage to a villain or minion. Spider-Man can deal 2 damage. Damage to a minion is shown using the orange damage tokens. Whenever a minion has taken damage equal to above their health level, discard the minion. Damage to the villain is shown using the large health dial. If the villain's health goes to 0, they progress to the next level. Discard the current stage. Set the hit point dial to the new hit point shown on the next stage and follow any when revealed instructions on the newly revealed card. You could thwart or attack with an ally in the same way, with one small difference. They may take consequential damage. This is shown with a small explosion under the thwart and attack stat on the ally. For example, Black Cat will take 1 consequential damage when they thwart, but no consequential damage when they attack. Whenever an ally takes damage equal to or above their health level, discard the ally. Effects may cause status cards to be attached to characters, affecting their thwarting and attacking ability. Stunned is discarded when a character would attack, preventing that attack. Confused is discarded when a character would thwart or scheme, preventing that action, and finally Tough is discarded when a player would take damage, that damage is prevented. Now the fifth and final action a player can take is to end their turn. Each player in turn order around the table will take their turn in full, and once every player has done this, we'll move to the end of player phase. Here in turn order, players can discard any number of cards from their hand, but they must at least discard down to their current hand limit. Note that the hero hand limit is different to the alter ego hand limit. For example, Peter Parker's hand limit is 6, but Spider-Man's is 5. Then players draw up to their current hand limit. If the deck ever runs out, players shuffle their discard pile into a new deck. After this, players will ready all the cards in their play area. After all players have done this, the villain will take a turn, which is done over 4 steps or shown on the villain phase reference card. Step 1. Place threat on the main scheme. Add threat tokens equal to the value shown in the acceleration field of the main scheme. For example, on Rhino's main scheme you add 1 scheme per player. Add extra threat tokens for each acceleration field icon showing in the villain player area. For example, there is one on Bomb Scare in the starter deck for Rhino, so if this card is in play, you would add an extra threat in this phase. Step 2. The villains and minions will activate in turn order around the table depending on the player's identity. If in alter ego mode, the villain will scheme, draw an encounter card for the villain and flip it face up. Add threat tokens to the main scheme equal to the villain's scheme value plus the number of boost icons on the bottom right of the dealt card. For example, Charge has 2 boost icons, so Rhino will add 3 scheme, 2 for the boost icons plus 1 for Rhino's scheme value. If it's a boost star icon, the villain will scheme their scheme value as usual, but will also receive the boost action of the card and discard it. For example, Whirlwind will deal 1 damage to each hero. Then each minion engaged with that player will scheme their base scheme value without boost cards. For example, Shocker will add 1 threat to the main scheme. The main scheme will show how many threat needs to be completed. For example, the break-in needs 7 threat per player, and in this case if this happens, the players lose the game. If the player is in hero form, instead of scheming, the villain will attack. Deal a card face down from the villain encounter deck to that player will now decide if they want to defend. The player can exhaust a hero or an ally in their play area to defend with that character, or choose not to defend at all. Another player can exhaust a hero or an ally in their own play area in order to defend on behalf of the active player. Reveal the card and deal damage to the defender equal to the villain attack value plus the number of boost icons in the bottom right of the card. For example, Charge has 2 boost icons, so Rhino will deal 4 damage, 2 for the boost icons plus 2 for Rhino's attack value. Again, if the boost card has a boost start, resolve it and deal the villain's base attack damage. If no one defended the attack, the hero takes all of the damage, which in our example would be 4. If the hero defends, the hero takes the attack minus their defense value. For example, if Rhino will deal 4 damage, Spider-Man has a defense of 3, so he will only take 1 damage in total. If an ally defended, they will take all of the damage. Then minions engaged with that player will attack without boost cards. For each minion that attacks, they have the same choices of defending, either with a hero, with an ally, or not at all. If the player's health dial reaches 0, they are eliminated from the game. Step 3 is to deal 1 encounter card from each player, face down from the top of the villain deck. Now step 4 is to reveal threats, and this is going to happen in turn order around the table and will depend on the type of card revealed. A minion engages with the player and is put in that player's play area ready. Resolve when revealed effects. For example, Shocker will deal 1 damage to each hero. Treachery, much like a hero's event card, is resolved and then discarded. For example, the card Advance will cause the villain to scheme. Some cards will have an effect depending on if the player is in alter ego or hero form. For example, Assault will cause the villain to attack you if in hero form, but if you're in alter ego form, the card gains Surge. Now whenever a card gains Surge, simply discard it and draw and resolve a new card. If a player draws an obligation card, it is given to the relevant player. For example, Eviction Notice is given to the player playing as Peter Parker to be resolved by that player immediately. Peter Parker may flip to alter ego if he isn't already, and then has 2 options. He can exhaust himself to remove Eviction Notice from play. If he can't exhaust or chooses not to, then he will discard obligation plus another card in his hand and draw and resolve another encounter immediately. Some cards like Shadow of the Past add the player's set aside Nemesis into play. Add the side scheme into play, resolve when revealed text and add threat as shown in the bottom of the card. The Nemesis minion, in this case Vulture for Spider-Man, is then engaged with that player and the other cards are placed in the encounter discard pile. If a villain reveals an attachment card, this will attach to the villain and will give them abilities and stat increases. Side schemes are put into play near the main scheme with a number of threat on them as shown in the bottom of the card as usual. Resolve any when revealed effects on the card. Side schemes have 3 scheme icons. The acceleration icon adds additional threat when the villain schemes, as mentioned earlier. The hazard icon forces 1 extra encounter card to be dealt to each player each turn. The crisis icon prevents threat being removed from the main scheme while this card is in play. And threat can be removed from a side scheme while thwarting. When a side scheme has no threat on it, it is simply discarded. Step 5 is to simply pass the player token clockwise and resolve any end of round effects. If the villain completes the final stage of their scheme or all the heroes are defeated, the villains win. But if the players defeat the final stage of the villain, they win. That's Marvel Champions, a cooperative hand management game. Please like this video if you found it useful, share it to let others know about it, and subscribe to the channel for more how to play videos as well as other board game related content. You can find me on Twitter at JTRPodcast, you can find my blog and other social links at jtrpodcast.com. I'll be Rob aka Jesta ThaRogue. Until next time, Avengers